Hi, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us today for this special webcast called The Shift Talent Acquisition Teams Need to Make Now. And I'm Robin Erickson. I'm a principal researcher here at the conference board, and I'm very pleased to be the moderator today. In terms of what we're going to be looking at, we're going to cover 4 questions. How is culture more relevant now than ever? What are the 4 pathways of cultural change? What's the role of an employee value proposition in defining the transformation? And what's the role of strategic workforce planning in enabling the transformation? So, also want to let you know that you can earn credits for attending today's webcast. Please stay online for the entire webcast and answer the questions for attendance verification that pop up on your screen. You can see there the different types of credit, and we just ask that you would request the one that you need. Also want to let you know that today's presentation is available for download on your screen. We'll also be taking questions at the end of the session, so please go ahead and add your questions to the Q&A box, and we'll leave plenty of time at the end to answer those. I also just wanted to mention that today's webcast is the first in a series of webcasts from the Human Capital Center here at the Conference Board. We've recently launched 10 different institutes focused on the gamut, the whole spectrum of human capital related issues. And this presentation today is coming to you from the Talent Acquisition Institute. And so with that, I would like to turn it over to our guest today from Profit. Profit is a strategy and transformation firm. And I'd like to turn it over to Tony Frost.
Thank you so much, Robin. We'd like to thank the Conference Board for inviting us and thank all of you for taking the time to be with us today. My name is Tony Frost, and I look after the organization and culture practice here at Profit, along with my partner Helen Rosethorn, who's based in London. With me today is Amanda Bala, a member of our ONC leadership team and the driving force behind the research that we'll be sharing shortly. Amanda, please say hi so people can tell our voices apart.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us.
Great. So before we jump into the heart of our presentation, I wanted to quickly provide a little context for those of you who might be unfamiliar with Profit. We're a small global management consultancy of about 500 colleagues, and we're focused on helping clients grow and transform. We have 4 focus areas: brand and activation, marketing and sales, experience and innovation, and organization and culture. We'll talk a lot today about our human-centered transformation model that's at the heart of our practice, but at the highest level, our organization and culture practice helps clients answer 4 key questions. So the first is, how might we define and harness a compelling purpose to drive performance? Meaning, how might we help our employees know that their work truly matters so that they feel in a state of flow for more of the year? The second is, how might we develop a culture that thrives on change? Meaning, how might we move beyond the constant waves of change management efforts in favor of having a workforce that really enjoys constant and adaptive iteration in the business? The third is, how might we build and sustain the capabilities that we need to thrive in the digital world? In other words, in order to be truly the master of our digital first present, be able to iteratively develop successful digital experiences, products, and services. And finally, how might we transform our organization to power growth? In other words, how might we be able to stop outsourcing innovation activities to consultancies and agencies, because we now have the people, processes, and technology to do it ourselves. So, how we're going to spend our time today. First, we're going to talk about our 2020 research into the our 2020 research into the levers of transformation, specifically the cultural levers of transformation. And for those of you who read our foundational 2019 research, this year we take a deeper dive to see those catalysts that we identified in action. We'll talk about the 4 pathways of cultural change that we identified in that process, and then based on time, we've got 2 deep dive case studies, one into EVP and one into strategic workforce planning. Now you'll note that we have Q&A at the end, but we'd like to be collecting your questions along the way as they come to mind. So please use the box provided in the interface so that we can capture those and make sure that we get to them at the end. Now first, before we start sharing all of this, we'd like to know a little bit more about the group so that we might tailor our conversation with you a bit today. So we have a couple of poll questions. about transformation and your role. So the first one, which best describes your company's transformation? So either you've not yet started, it's underway, but no phases are completed at least a phase or a part, or you're complete or close to completing a major transformation. Thus far, it looks like most of you are at least somewhere on your journey. Yep, that number's ticking up. Oh, some other people are balancing us out a little bit more. Very interesting. Okay, let's take a look at those results, share them with everybody. So it looks like over half of you have completed at least a phase or a part. That should make our conversation today pretty germane. Those of you who are underway, there may be some opportunity for some new ideas. And those of you who are close to complete, you've got this mastered. All right, let's take a look at the next one. Okay, so how might you characterize the most recent transformation project that you were involved in? And please, this is multi-choice, so I assume most of you have digital as part of it, but there's probably some other elements as well. Interesting. Are you seeing this, Amanda? This is pretty great.
I am. Very multifaceted group here.
Yeah. There's a few more coming in. Just slightly picking up. Oh. Okay. Just give you another few seconds because I see the numbers are still moving. So we're wading heavily into reorg and people transformation and digital. All right, let's share those back. Okay, so well over half of you are involved in some sort of reorg or people transformation, not surprising probably at this moment in time. A significant number of you looking at culture, which is great, and not surprisingly, nearly half also have a big component of digital. Interesting, there's not more customer experience represented. We see a lot of transformations, particularly right now, being driven by a need for experience transformation, particularly in the B2B space. All right, moving forward. So we're going to start now taking a look at the research, and I'm going to hand it off to Amanda to tell you a little bit about that.
Great, thanks, Tony. Well, before we dive into the research, we wanted to spend some time on our human-centered transformation model, which is foundational to how at Profit we think about organization and culture. So the idea here is that organizations are made up of many humans, so therefore, like humans, organizations have DNA, a mind, a body, and a soul. So DNA, this is where we collectively really define our direction of travel. This is things like our purpose and values, our business and brand strategy, and our employee value proposition. Soul is where we really motivate employees to work together as an organization. So these are things like our shared symbols and rituals and mindsets and behaviors. Mind are the skills and the competencies that we bring to our work. And then body is how we organize ourselves. So what's the organization design and the operating model in terms of the processes, systems, incentives, and governance that we use to make transformation real. So before we get into the 2020 research, I think it's worth revisiting the research that we did in 2019 as it really created the foundation for the work that we did this year. So last year we did another global piece of research where we took the model that we just went through and we went deeper to uncover, within the model, what are really the key levers of cultural change which span each of those areas that we just went through, DNA, mind, body, and soul. And that research uncovered 6 fundamentals and 5 accelerators. So the fundamentals, these are the essentials of transformation. The table stakes are the things that if you didn't do them, the transformation really wouldn't happen. The accelerators are exactly what they sound to be. So they work in combination with the fundamentals and one or more accelerators coming together to accelerate the impact. And so when we introduced this research last year, we received very positive feedback from our clients and from others with whom we had the conversation in terms of how this helped to reinforce the importance of working across the model. But we also heard kind of two questions that commonly came up. So the first one was, how do I implement these levers? What do they look like in practice? What does it mean, for instance, to develop a clear roadmap? And then the second question is, where should I focus? Or for those who haven't started transformation, where should I even start? 11 levers can be difficult, perhaps, to implement together all at once. And so is there a way to really help focus the efforts that we're bringing to transformation? And so this prompted us to recognize that we could go even deeper and more actionable against the research that we started in 2019. And so these were the questions that we set out to answer in 2020, and then the world changed. So, we started the research early in 2020 with qualitative research, then we moved into a quantitative phase, and in the midst of this quantitative phase is when the COVID-19 pandemic really began gaining steam. And so, as we all know, COVID has changed quite a bit, but one thing that hasn't changed, and in fact has accelerated, is transformation. So, where companies before may have had discretion over the pace and the urgency with which they were transforming, now there's really no option if they are to thrive in the digital age. And so it's our belief that in this context of COVID, transformation is more relevant than ever. So within this context, we wanted to use this research to really develop an actionable playbook for transformation. And so in late May, we released the research report that you see here, Catalyst in Action, Applying the Cultural Levers of Transformation. This is also available for download through the platform. And the idea was to help readers really understand and grasp the levers that we introduced last year, but to apply them in an actionable way to really produce impact and results. So the way that we went about that was, as I mentioned before, we did qualitative and then quantitative research. And across those phases of research, we engaged nearly 500 global transformation leaders. So this spanned 4 different countries, the US, the UK, Germany, and China. We also, within that sample, had a group, much like the one that we have today, in terms of where they were in those stages of transformation. There was a higher percentage in the research, about a third, who said they had completed transformation, and then the other 2/3 were in progress in varying stages. And so that was really helpful for us to uncover what are some of the things that are going to be really important, regardless of where you are in your stage of transformation. I think the other important thing to note here is that it was a very senior audience that was involved. So 60% sit in the C-suite, which was also very helpful to us to get really an enterprise-wide view of transformation. So from here, we want to move into something that was really the crux of the research that we did this year, which are identifying 4 pathways of cultural change. And the question that we were really exploring here is, if 11 levers might be too much to manage at any one time, are there, when we look at the data, patterns in terms of the levers that companies view as most important? Or said differently, are there a few levers that, when actioned together, can truly produce meaningful impact and change? So this is how we organized our analysis, and we found that the answer is yes. We saw 4 different groups break out, and we've interpreted these as pathways of cultural change. So to walk through each one of them, the first one is defining the transformation. And what this means is really establishing the destination and who the leadership for the transformation is going to be. So we think about this pathway as kind of the lighthouse for the other pathways. It really sets where we're heading and serves to shape the rest of the transformation. And levers that are important here are things like setting a powerful, actionable ambition and clarifying which leaders will lead. The next pathway is directing the transformation. This one is most aligned to the body, whereas defining the transformation, which we just went through, is most aligned to DNA within our model. And directing the transformation is about building an operating model that makes the transformation real. So these are levers such as developing a clear roadmap, developing KPIs. I'm seeing that we might be having some audio issues.
Yes, the recommendation is that the recommendation is that maybe you should switch to a headset because something has gone a little washy. If you have.
Sorry about that. I can try. I know in our test previously the headphones didn't work. Is that any better if I lean in closer?
Let's give it a go. It's a little inconsistent.
Okay. Apologies. Tony, I trust you will take over if needed, but so picking up on directing the transformation. So as mentioned, the levers that matter here are things like developing a clear roadmap, developing KPIs, pushing decision rates downward, and aligning incentives for cross-functional work. The next pathway is enabling the transformation, and this is most closely tied to the mind. And this is going to be a really important pathway that we talk about because we believe talent acquisition plays a very important role when it comes to enabling the transformation. This is where companies really supercharge their workforces in terms of the skills and the capabilities that are needed to thrive in transformation. So this includes levers such as identifying the skills, capabilities, and roles needed, developing training to upskill talent, and also aligning talent systems in service of the transformation. And then the final pathway is motivating the transformation. This is most closely aligned to the soul. So this is where leaders really both talk and walk the talk by doing things such as role modeling behaviors for their employees, creating meaningful mechanisms for employees to adapt to change, and recognizing and rewarding progress and not just outcomes. So these are the 4 pathways. There's 2 points that I wanted to make about these. One is, what the idea of pathway itself means. Even though it may sound like a fixed term, it's not intended to be. These can be thought about as entry points or ways to move through the model. And at any point in a company's transformation, they're going to need to move through each one of these 4 pathways. So it's not that any one of them is a silver bullet, but the idea of the pathway is that it helps you determine where do I need to focus right now in terms of the change that's most needed. The second point is we tend to get a question around sequence in terms of is there a typical or a right sequence for how to move through these pathways? And the answer is generally no, with one exception. Defining the transformation is always an important place to start. Again, we mentioned that this is the lighthouse for transformation, and so, therefore, by establishing the clarity that's needed within defining the transformation, that then sets the stage for the rest of the pathways to be that much more effective.
Amanda, I'm going to suggest that I finish this slide while you try your headset.
Okay.
So depending on where you are feeling friction in the organization, you might want to look at a different place in the model to start. So if you're feeling like there's lack of clarity and people aren't clear which way they need to be moving in the organization, then obviously you need to take a look at the levers that we have in defining the transformation, making sure that you have a clear, actionable vision, people understand where you're going. If you find that the issues are really in the operating model, so people are feeling burdened by the existing processes, procedures, governance, decision rights, then you really need to take a look at directing the transformation. You may discover that you're getting a lot of feedback in the organization that we don't have the right skills and competencies that we need to be successful. Often this comes at the moment around digital for obvious reasons. And so then you really need to be looking at enabling the transformation and at your talent and capabilities model. And if you're feeling simply that things are moving at different paces, there's a lack of alignment, then it's time to take a look at what's going on in the soul of the organization and make sure that you've got people understanding exactly what the stories are that you're telling, the behaviors that are expected, the rituals that need to be in place in order to keep the work aligned. How's your headset doing?
Are you able to hear me now?
Yes,
okay.
Brilliantly.
I can't hear you, but if you all can hear me and if that sounds better, I'm going to keep presenting. Apologies to everyone for the patience. All right, so I trust that Tony has completed this slide with excellence. So now we want to invite you to submit questions that you have As Robin mentioned, we will address them at the end, but we wanted to capture them along the way while they're still top of mind. But from here, we wanted to move into a deeper dive on two of the pathways that we believe are really important for talent acquisition. And to be clear, we believe talent acquisition plays a role across all four of these pathways, given that they're important to shaping the overall culture and experience of the organization. But there's two in which we believe talent acquisition can truly be leaders. The first one is defining the transformation, and then the second one, enabling the transformation. So defining the transformation, that's a really critical pathway for establishing why employees would want to work for our organization versus others, and we believe talent acquisition has a really unique perspective on that. Enabling the transformation, that's where companies build and source the talent that they need to thrive in transformation. And so later on in the presentation, Tony's going to talk about some work that talent acquisition leaders might do around strategic workforce planning as one way to enable the transformation. But first we wanted to focus in on defining the transformation, and in particular, the role of an employee value proposition, or EVP. So we view EVP as really core to a company's DNA and important to defining the transformation. And it's because it helps companies to really emphasize the unique strengths and qualities, the aspects of their culture and experience that help establish the unique value they create as employers. The reason why EVP matters is because it leads to real bottom line impact. So I'm sure we don't have to emphasize too much for those on this line the importance of the business benefits that are on this page, but we see that a strong EVP and really strengthening how you're seen as an employer can lead to lower churn and lower search costs. It can help bring the right types of people into the organization, ones who are going to be really engaged and productive, so lead to higher revenues. And so ultimately, putting those together, an EVP can lead to improved profitability. So what do we mean when we say EVP? We think about this as the handshake between a company and an employee. Or you might hear terms such as give-get. But the idea is that it's really about a mutually beneficial relationship where an employer and employee each come together and bring something unique to the deal, which helps to shape a unique value proposition and deliver on it. And the reason why EVP is important to defining the transformation is because it really helps to drive clarity and focus. So for instance, an EVP serves to prioritize what mindsets, behaviors, and skills are needed. It helps to identify the key priorities important to attract and grow top talent. It helps to guide investments, and it helps to clarify and communicate the strategies to both prospective and current employees in a way that's really inspiring and compelling. But EVP has to go beyond just words on a page. It has to be expressed both externally through the employer brand and then internally through the employee experience. And from an employer brand standpoint, the EVP really gets expressed to help shape external perceptions of what's unique about our company as an employer, and it should shine through across the multiple different touch points that we have externally, whether that's recruiting comms, job fairs, advertising, or different touch points of the recruiting experience. Those expectations then need to be paid off internally through the employee experience. And so we use EVP to help shape the aspects of the employee experience in ways that are unique. So for instance, what's different about the way that we might do performance reviews or incentives or development unique from any other organization. And so we wanted to bring this to life through an example of work that we've done with one of our clients, United Airlines. I'm sure most of this group is familiar with this major airline here in the US, and they were undergoing a culture transformation and needed a really compelling EVP to help define it. And so in this case, they had been working to transform their culture really since the merger with Continental earlier in the decade, and had been making progress toward building a culture that was really inspiring to employees. But there was a very public incident that happened in 2017, which garnered some bad press, which really served as a wake-up call in terms of the culture not being where they needed it to be, and really wanting to use this moment as a touchstone in order to shape the culture in the way that was needed to really power the transformation. And so there was a multi-faceted effort against this. Profit worked with United in a number of different ways, but one of them was really helping to define and shape this culture of caring and recognizing that, recruiting employees with the right service mentality was going to be really critical to this culture. And certainly pilots sit at the heart of it. But at the same time, there was a challenge in that there's a shortage of pilot talent, and other airlines were moving more aggressively to recruit those pilots. And so United realized that they needed a really compelling EVP to attract this pilot talent. They also were preparing to launch a new career path program for pilots called Aviate, and needed the EVP to really shine through and form the foundation for that career path program. So where we started in defining the EVP is where we start most of them, which is gathering firsthand insight from the types of talent that we want to attract. And so in this case, we did groups with both current and prospective pilots. And we learned quite a bit, but one of the key takeaways was really around the idea of control. So we uncovered that there were a number of unknowns in the experience. So for instance, when a new pilot joins, they might be asked to fly for a regional carrier for 2 to 4 years and then need to wait for another pilot to retire before they can be promoted and feel like they're really part of that full United and pilot experience. And so they were looking for ways to connect into something bigger and also have transparency into a process that could feel confusing. And so we took this insight of control and really used that to form the foundation of the big idea of the employee value proposition, which was captain your career. So really putting pilots in the driver's seat, so to speak, and making sure that they knew United was there to support them every step of the way. And then to support that idea of captain your career, we needed to think about the pillars. So what needs to be true in order to really deliver on this promise? And that should be a mix of things that are both credible today and then aspirational for tomorrow. And so the whole of this, which is the EVP, really helps to shape the soul, the mind, and the body of the organization. So for instance, you'll see one of the pillars was connections that matter. So from a soul standpoint, how can we really motivate our pilots to work with one another and build those connections that matter? Or from a body standpoint, what are the systems and the tools that might be needed to help pilots choose their own adventure, for instance? So this EVP forms the foundation of the Aviate program, which launched in October 2019. And again, it was more than just kind of words on a page in the communications, but it was really a supporting set of experiences to ensure that the EVP was coming to life in very tangible ways. So I mentioned before, the mind and the body and the soul, and you can see in some of the examples on the right how those come through. So for instance, in terms of the soul and building on that pillar of connections that matter, we developed a series of stories, pilots like you stories, showing how other pilots have navigated their careers and really helping them serve as role models to other pilots in that regard. Or the body, which is all about the tools and the systems and processes that are needed. You can see in the bottom right-hand side there, this idea of chart your career tools, which would help pilots take a look back at where they had been, right? Like, let's say the number of miles they had flown, and then where they were going, what the opportunities were. So this launched very successfully in October 2019, and then within 6 months after that, COVID had launched. And so some of you may be wondering, why are we talking about an airline during a time that is clearly quite difficult for the industry and for airline-related careers? And we actually specifically chose this example for the reason that we believe, EVP matters now more than it ever does. EVP, again, is really about the DNA of a company. And we say that the most successful companies are truly leaning into their DNA, into what makes them really special as employers, reminding employees of why they work there. And, as we mentioned earlier, transformation is more relevant than ever during COVID, and we believe that EVP is one critical way that companies can help to define that transformation. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tony, who's going to go through another critical pathway, which is enabling the transformation.
Thank you, Amanda. I wanted to also comment about EVP that at the moment, one of the things that we're seeing, in addition to the need to make the EVP clear because of the pandemic, the social justice and Black Lives Matter movements specifically are raising lots of issues around EVP right now. And we're seeing a lot of companies be exposed, and a lot of academic institutions and cultural institutions be exposed for not having lived up to their EVP. in that dimension. And we're seeing a lot of companies trying to figure out, and from a talent acquisition perspective, how to make sure that the EVP is strong, because right now, the commitments that companies are making to diversify their workforce are very hard to meet because everybody's trying to do it at once. And if your EVP isn't strong and you can't make it clear that through your mind, body, and soul, as well as your DNA, that those things are going to be real, you're going to have a lot of challenges trying to meet those goals going forward. Now, sure, JG, you said more examples of BLM on EVP. Let's definitely come back to that at the end, because I have a few in mind. And JG, I saw your comment earlier. Thank you for your kind note about my having presented previously to the conference board. I wanted to mention the case I'm about to share with you. I previewed a little bit when we spoke last fall. And so now we're going to take a deep dive in to see what actually happened. So here we are. No matter how digital the world gets, a company is ultimately dependent on the skills of its human workforce to continuously create and deliver value. And what that means is that you need to be doing workforce planning. And we know, specifically all of you know, that your workforce is ultimately the key to your success, that managing talent increases EBITDA, that engaged employees increase customer retention, that well-developed employees contribute dramatically to the bottom line. And frankly, that's why all of us are employed, all of us in the talent acquisition space. It's all about the workforce. However, that said, fewer than half of all enterprises can confidently say whether the employees are doing the right work to advance their business strategies. And COVID has really accelerated some anxiety around this, because companies are realizing that certain portions of their business have stalled and certain efforts need to stop. And the question is, what do we do with our workforce going forward? Now, even before COVID, companies were using a very dated approach to workforce planning. So people were tending to focus on employee headcount numbers needed for each function as the starting place. They were looking historically to try to project forward, and each function was working independently, which leads you into kind of a Hunger Games for a limited pool of resources. Very unhealthy, and so they end up with leaders starting defensive because they're trying to protect individual roles. Departments are focused on refining the present, and nobody's really picturing ahead to the future. And leaders inevitably create duplicative capabilities across the enterprise because they're not thinking about the enterprise as a whole. They're sub-optimizing for this function. And ultimately, too often what happens is growth stalls. After year on year of this kind of behavior, you end up with sort of like a decorator crab, all these encrusted behaviors and duplicative capabilities that begin to weigh down on the enterprise. So we believe that transforming workforce planning for the digital age requires three things. So the first is to be visionary. So you really need to be trying not to just to plan for the next 12-month cycle, but you need to picture ahead probably 3 years out to figure out what it is that your enterprise is going to need then. You need to start with a focus on capability building versus headcount. And throughout all of that, you need to be applying an enterprise mindset. So here's an example of what this looks like in action. We have a client who has been a fast-growing quick-serve restaurant for many years, and their challenge was that they've been growing so fast for so long, it's the decorator crab problem, that within their headquarters function, they had developed a lot of people, process, and technical debt, meaning that things just kept being done the same old way throughout the growth curve, and as a result, even though they'd spent a lot of money updating the physical plant of their headquarters, which is beautiful and has everything you would hope for in the digital age, they actually had very little formal knowledge of what anybody was doing in the space that they had provided for that work. So the opportunity statement was, in order to transform their headquarters function and enable the ongoing growth, was how might we create a 3-year talent and capabilities plan that enables the business to develop a more nimble, capable, and thriving staff. Because all of that people, process, and technical debt starts to wear down on people, and you start hearing things like, it's too hard to get things done around here. So that's where we started, and we started this work originally last August. Now, it's important to start off also just saying, at Profit, we think that really smart strategic workforce planning is both a combination of workforce planning and business modeling. So it borrows a lot from business architecture because first you have to design exactly what a department does today. You have to really clarify that because there's often a lot of fuzziness there. And then what it should do in the future before you can define what sort of talent they need. Now, a lot of people ask for this slide. Don't worry, it will be in the download. You can have it, but this just shows how we think about the roll-up from skills to roles to services that a function delivers to the functional capability, which ultimately you might decide to elevate to a strategic or enterprise capability. So to set the platform for this engagement, we designed a 2-day vision workshop. We brought everybody together from the 3 transformation sub-work streams. So that was people, process, and technology. First, we helped them come up with a shared fact base and agree what are the most important facts about their need to transform. And then we helped them to build an opportunity map. For those of you who've worked with Profit, you may have seen we use a why, what's stopping analysis to do that. And we get a set of qualitatively prioritized how might we statements from broadest to narrowest. And from that opportunity map came the vision statement that I shared a moment ago for the people sub-work stream, as well as a larger one for the transformation overall. Now, after we had done that, we defined services and capabilities functions for, defined capabilities and services catalogs for each function. And then we were able to engage more than 2,000 staff with a survey. And by the way, we partnered with OrgView. For those of you who know some of the players in this space, in the SaaS space right now, OrgView, Busier. We've had very good experiences ourselves with our clients with OrgView. So we used their survey function to better understand how resources were decked against those capability and services today, both staff and contractors, and then to find out how the staff felt about the work that they were doing and how resources were being stewarded. Those insights from that help the leaders and the leadership teams of each function then build a 3-year vision for where that function needed to go. And that set the stage then for thinking about what sort of capabilities do they need in the future. So from that, we then use a capability maturity model. This is also a rather popular slide, so yes, you'll have this too. A lot of organizations don't really think strategically about where in the life cycle of maturity of a functional capability sits today. So there's some new stuff that you need to be exploring. If that proves to be valuable, then you're going to want to invest and build that out. Eventually it becomes established and it's a run the business capability. And at some point along the way, you may decide that you need to do some refinement. So we helped each of the teams take a look at their capability and services catalogs, figure out where there were gaps, figured out what they really needed to be doing more of to invest, to build, and where there were opportunities to digitize or optimize so that things that had become business as usual, if they were waning in value, didn't just stay there burdening the staff, but we begin to look for places to transition those outwards. So having come to the end of that, we were then able to say, all right, what is the talent and capabilities roadmap for each function? What's the learning and development capability roadmap for each function? And provide them with a communications plan and a value driver matrix to begin to measure the impact to the business. So that's just sort of the arc of the engagement. Now, what happened next was COVID. So we were actually about 2 months away from the end of the engagement when COVID-19 hit. Now, a lot of companies would have stopped the work. Our client did not choose to stop the work at that moment because they believed that there's still growth, and we continued the future state strategy work and completed all those deliverables. However, because we had done all of the fact-finding around the current state, we were able to pivot and use all of the data that we had gathered to help our client redeploy staff across the business and ensure that everyone could continue to be engaged in meaningful work despite business disruptions. And it was only because we had done that work and we had the first ever picture of exactly how many FTEs, both staff and contractors, were decked against every capability and service that we could help them identify contractor hotspots and opportunities to redeploy staff into those roles. And as a result, nobody had to lose their job. So the end result in terms of the outcomes here is that our client has a much deeper understanding of the work that is done and needs to be done in their headquarters across all 2,000 staff. We know where the tension and stress was in the existing model. We have a 3-year vision for each function for the enterprise as a whole, and all of the leaders who went through this process, because part of what we believe is that we should do this with our clients, not to them. So they were all very engaged both in designing the methods, processing the outputs, and then developing the strategies with us. They are all much deeper in terms of their enterprise mindset and their ability to think strategically about the needs of the business. Now, finally, I just wanted to share one more thing before we go to Q&A, which is one last nugget about leadership that came from our research. And I will turn it over to Amanda to do that. Maybe not. Looks like Amanda might be frozen. All right. So one last piece that came out of our research is we were wondering, what are the things that matter now in leading as we look globally at all of these transformations and leaders who are being successful? Ah, you're back. Can you hear? All right, I will keep going unless you can hear me. You can.
I can hear.
Yes, now we can.
Can you hear me?
You want to go?
You can hear me speaking. Yes, I will take it. I'm sorry, everyone, about all the problems, but this is interesting, so I'm glad you can hear me now. So what we wanted to do was share with you 6 themes in terms of the top transformation leadership characteristics that came through in our research. And so the first one is inviting of many voices to contribute and be heard. And this is actually the one characteristic that ranked among the most important in all 4 of the countries in our study. And this is one that has always resonated powerfully with us at Profit. One of our values is many voices, one team, which really speaks to the importance of inclusion and diversity. And I think certainly in the climate and events of the past several months, this one has never been more important. And so we were very heartened to see the elevated importance with which the leaders in our study really viewed inviting of many voices. The next leadership characteristic is actually the combination of 2, agility and curiosity. So of course each of those are important in their own right, but they really become interesting when you put them in combination with one another, where curiosity is really about learning and trying new things to uncover new ideas, and then agility is about the ability to flex and pivot to really realize and capture the value from those new ideas. The third leadership characteristic is around empathy, and this was one that we saw particularly spike in Europe. And the idea of empathy here is really having and being perceived to have sensitivity for how employees are experiencing the transformation, recognizing that transformation and the change that goes along with it can be difficult and sometimes even a little bit scary. So having strong empathy for what that feels like from the employees and those on your team from their perspective. The fourth one was about using this as an opportunity to further develop organizational talent. And we saw this as actually the highest rated leadership characteristic in China and one of the highest in the US. And the way that we think about this is, that leaders are using transformation as an opportunity to really bring their employees along on the journey. One thing that was interesting is in China, we actually saw that, relative to other countries, they showed more willingness to experiment and also more comfort and tolerance when it came to failure. And so we think that there's an interesting relationship between this idea of further developing organizational talent during transformation and then a commitment to creating safe spaces for employees to try new things and feel comfortable in doing that. The fifth characteristic is growth mindset, and this was actually the most important characteristic in the US and also one that rated highly in the UK. And some may question the importance of growth during this time of COVID when many companies are struggling to even just survive. But we believe that growth mindset is actually more important than ever, given that companies really have an opportunity to source growth in the face of disruption. And then the final characteristic is more substance, less spin. And this is actually more about the characteristics that didn't rate as highly in our survey. So what we saw is characteristics around imagination, storytelling, and bravery actually rated a bit lower on the list. And the way that we interpreted that is not to say that those aren't important. They are, but that without, the clarity and specificity, things like storytelling are going to fall flat. Employees are really seeking clarity from their leaders. And so hopefully this is, helpful to you all as individuals to take back and think about ways that you can guide your teams and organizations through transformation. So I'd like to invite you to take this opportunity to submit any further questions in the chat. We're getting ready to move into the Q&A portion, so this would be a great time to do that. So while you're submitting your questions, I did just want to finish up here, so we'll get into Q&A in a minute. But I did want to note, it looks like a few of you have seen this already, but we do have the slides from today's presentation as well as our full research report available through the platform for download. We also wanted to provide to you the contact information for myself and for Tony. We would love to hear from you, any observations that you have or questions. Feel free to reach out at any time, and certainly wanted to thank you for your attention and patience with some of the technical difficulties today. So Robin, I will turn it over to you. I know that you're going to moderate some Q&A for us.
Sure, and thank you both so much. And Amanda, we had two dry runs, and we didn't have any of these issues with the sound, so we know that's not your fault, and just one of those Murphy's Law issues with all of the craziness of this turbulent time that you actually were talking about. So thank you to our audience for your patience with that, and thank you both for your flexibility. And I think you all would agree that this time is requiring a lot of agility and flexibility for all of us in many different ways. So, and as Amanda mentioned, feel free to submit any questions that you have in the Q&A. And one comment did come in, and I just wanted to mention that this methodology, Emily thought that this was very similar to the Lean PDCA cycle.
Yes.
So Tony, do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. So, and I responded to Emily in the chat. We're very influenced by Lean, yes. I was part of the Lean Six Sigma team years ago when I was at Pfizer, and so Lean definitely influences our thinking, but I would say that we're even more influenced by appreciative inquiry. So where you see Lean come through is in the business modeling aspect of the work, but appreciative inquiry really drives the approach. So much of what we do is about engaging groups of people, about picturing ahead optimistically where the firm is going to go and needs to go. And so, for instance, with each of the functions, we will do a group fact-finding, converge on key facts, build an opportunity map, use that to develop a vision. And then in parallel, we're also doing the catalog building, which looks like the Lean work. We try to bring those two things together, because if you only do the Lean work, if you only do the capability and services catalog development, it can feel, well, first of all, if you sequence it wrong, if you do that first, it feels like you're grading people's homework. Second, if you really only use that as the focus of your approach, then people often feel ground down by it because there's not really any dialogue about where are we going as a group. So we try to keep those fairly well balanced. The other thing that came in was JG asked about Black Lives Matter on EVP. And so the example that I wanted to offer there is very recently, some of you may be aware of a firm called The Wing, which was launched as a co-working space specifically for women. And one of the women who worked there, who happens to be a Black American, recently published a piece which has gone viral on her experience there in an organization that was supposed to be uplifting women. The Wing is already in transition, CEO being forced out, and now this rears its head as well. It's going to be very hard, despite all the funding that they've brought on board, to right that ship. There's also another trend that we're seeing that's hit very strongly in academia and cultural institutions, which we think is going to start emerging like this did in the corporate world. If you go on Instagram and type black at and choose the name of your child's school, a school that you went to, you will find an Instagram account where Black students are sharing their experience of institutional racism. And that exists probably at this point for almost every school in America. It's also happened in the museum world now, and actually the museum world has responded rather quickly. But we're going to start seeing waves of this in the corporate world as well. My big question is, does it show up on Glassdoor? And I think the answer is yes. The question is, how does it show up on Glassdoor? But I think this is going to be a really pressing issue in terms of EVP going forward.
And I totally agree with that. We also had another comment come in saying that this content is very strong for outside talent acquisition, and that's obviously true. We had asked Profit to share their thoughts specifically for talent acquisition, but clearly their article that they wrote is around more than just talent acquisition.
Well, here's the thing. Yeah, go ahead, Amanda.
I was just going to say, so to Robin's point, we did try to tailor today for the talent acquisition audience and choose, two of the pathways and some specific examples that we thought would be more relevant. But I would encourage you to read the full research report. I think you'll see that the content in there should be applicable not only to the broader HR organization, but really to leaders across your organization. That's the feedback that we've been getting from different partners within Profit is, they're finding that it's resonating well across different clients. And I think part of that goes back to the leaders that we involved in the study, where certainly we had a portion from human resources, but we had, chief digital officers, customer experience, those related to brand and communications, strategy and corporate communications. So really a strong range of leaders, which I think helped us to put together a wide-ranging set of perspectives. So thanks for acknowledging that.
Yeah, I mean, this is somewhat intentional as well. Having been to a conference board event for the TA group and having seen all the people that you bring in to speak very specifically in this swim lane, I just didn't make that much sense to do more of the same. So we try to broaden it out a little bit. You asked for another example of Black Lives Matter. Yeah, Hannah Anderson, as an example, the popular children's clothing manufacturer, has really been taken to task for not being as diverse as they have tried to be once Black Lives Matter in the last few months became a national dialogue. So they posted something on their Instagram. Current and former employees started saying, we don't really live this. The CEO came out swinging and actually looked someone up on LinkedIn and went after them. And it's created all sorts of issues in the press. That's one of several examples. The other thing that we're seeing a lot of now is people who have been chief diversity officers opening up and saying, here's the problem with this role. Here's how poorly this is funded. This is a figurehead. It's not really the DNA of the company. This is a figurehead. It's not really in the soul of the company. It's not in the stories that we tell. It's not what we truly value. So there's a lot out there.
And Tony, actually, thank you for bringing that up. We have a lot of research here at the conference board on this particular issue. We've published research recently in the last few weeks, specifically after the Black Lives Matter campaign started growing in prominence. We also just published a report on how to align engagement and inclusion to enhance the employee experience, and how that's not happening in most organizations. They're oftentimes the leaders of those groups report to different people. They don't share the same budgets. They don't share the same communication strategies. And so the idea of aligning inclusion and experience is actually probably really useful. So you can find that on the conference board site as well. We don't have any other questions. So with that, just a few closing things. I want to thank our audience, but I also want to thank especially Tony and Amanda. Thank you so much for joining us today. And if you're interested in some upcoming webcasts, you can see there that some are listed. And there's one that might be of particular interest to the talent acquisition community, which is the fourth one there, different in degree, closing the talent gap with alternative credentials. We've just posted a report on that, and many organizations are turning to alternative credentials in order to help include the diversity across their organization in many different ways. Last but not least, we have our podcast, Human Capital Center Insights. If you're a big fan of those, you can find them in all the places that you would download podcasts from, as well as on our website. We'd also like to ask you to take the evaluation form that you're going to see coming up on your screen to help us be better. And again, I'll thank everyone for their time today, especially to Amanda and Tony, and hope you have a great weekend. Bye-bye.
Thank you all so
Thank
much.
you.